The Gym Crush. Part 1. The First Spark. The rhythmic hum of treadmills filled the air, mixed with the pulsing bass of the gym speakers. The intense energy of the place was contagious, and it made her feel alive. Megan wiped the sweat from her brow, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She glanced around the room, the flickering fluorescent lights casting a faint glow on the sea of bodies in motion. She'd been coming to this gym for nearly 6 months now, and she never felt more at home than she did here, surrounded by people chasing their fitness goals just like her. But that wasn't the only reason she kept coming back. Tyler, her personal trainer, was everything her husband wasn't. He had an aura about him that drew everyone's eyes, tall, muscular, with sharp features, and an easy confidence that made women turn their heads. Megan wasn't immune to it either. She hadn't planned on developing feelings for him, but from the moment they started training together, the chemistry had been undeniable. Every touch, every casual brush of his hand on her back or waist during a session, sent a current through her body. Today was no different. Tyler stood close behind her, watching her movements in the mirror as she performed a set of squats. His eyes never left her, his intense gaze making her feel exposed, vulnerable. She couldn't help but notice the way he always seemed to find a reason to touch her, correcting her form, guiding her through each motion. "Good, Megan. Just like that," he murmured, his breath hot against her ear. His hands lingered on her hips longer than necessary, the pressure firm but controlled. "One more rep." She obeyed, but her mind wasn't on the workout anymore. It was on the way his body seemed to fit so perfectly against hers, how their proximity blurred the lines between trainer and client, between harmless flirting and something much more dangerous. Her heart raced, not just from the exertion, but from the undeniable attraction between them. As she finished the last rep and stood up straight, their eyes met in the mirror. For a brief moment, the gym faded away. The blaring music, the grunts of effort from other patrons, the clanking of weights, it all became background noise. Tyler's hand slid off her waist, and he gave her a slow, knowing smile. "You're getting stronger," he said, his voice laced with something that wasn't just professional pride. His eyes lingered on her body, admiring the way her sports bra clung to her sweat-slicked skin, the way her leggings hugged her curves. He wasn't hiding his appreciation, and she wasn't pretending she didn't notice. "Thanks," Megan replied, her voice catching slightly. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but she didn't look away. There was a tension between them, a magnetic pull that neither of them acknowledged aloud, but both felt intensely. It started innocently enough, just lingering looks, playful banter. But it wasn't long before she started coming to the gym earlier, staying later, finding excuses to train with Tyler more often. The attraction had grown into something that consumed her thoughts. Even at home with her husband Chris, she found her mind drifting to the gym, to Tyler's strong hands guiding her, to the way his eyes darkened when they were alone. And then, one day, Tyler made it impossible to pretend it was just harmless flirting. They were in one of the back corners of the gym, away from the crowded machines, working through an intense core workout. Megan was lying on the mat, her body stretched out as she held a plank position, her muscles burning with the effort. Tyler knelt beside her, his hand resting on her lower back as he instructed her on the proper form. His touch was firm, but not impersonal. It lingered. "Hold it. Just a little longer," he urged, his voice low, almost intimate. His hand slid lower, grazing the waistband of her leggings. She froze, her breath hitching in her throat. He didn't move away. Instead, his thumb traced the edge of the fabric, sending a shiver down her spine. "Tyler." Her voice was barely a whisper, her mind racing. This wasn't part of the routine, wasn't part of the workout. But the thrill of it, the danger, made her heart pound in her chest. She could feel the heat radiating from his body, his proximity making her dizzy with desire. "You're doing great," he said, his voice laced with a meaning that wasn't about fitness. "Just keep holding it." Megan knew then that this wasn't going to end with just innocent flirting. The tension between them had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The gym had become more than a place to work on her body. It had become the stage for a temptation she could no longer resist. Part 2. Stolen Moments. The next few weeks passed in a blur, each gym session charged with a growing intensity between Megan and Tyler. Every touch felt deliberate, every glance a silent promise. She would find herself holding her breath when his hands moved over her body, guiding her through a stretch or adjusting her form. The tension between them had evolved into something physical, something real. But it wasn't just lust, it was the feeling of being seen, desired, in a way she hadn't felt in years. At home, Megan felt the weight of guilt settle over her like a heavy blanket. Chris was oblivious, still wrapped up in his own routine. He was a good man, steady, reliable, the kind of husband most women would be grateful for. But somewhere along the way, their relationship had lost its spark. The nights where they would stay up late talking, laughing, or even touching each other with that same eagerness they'd once had faded. Their conversations now revolved around groceries, bills, and the mundane details of life. With Tyler, it was different. His attention felt like a drug, and Megan found herself craving it more and more. She would catch herself thinking about him while cooking dinner, lying in bed next to Chris, or driving to work. It was exhilarating and terrifying at the same time. The stolen moments began in the quieter parts of the gym. When no one was around, Tyler would find her, his hands brushing hers in a way that sent electricity through her veins. They were careful at first, exchanging lingering looks, a subtle touch on the arm, but soon the hunger between them grew too strong to control. One afternoon, after an intense session of cardio, Tyler pulled her into the small, dimly lit stretch area behind the lockers. The gym was crowded that day, but this spot felt private, hidden from prying eyes. Megan's heart raced as she followed him, a mix of excitement and fear swirling in her chest. She knew this was crossing a line, but the pull between them was impossible to resist. Tyler's breath was ragged, his body close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. He leaned in, his lips hovering just above her ear as he spoke, his voice low and husky. "You've been driving me crazy," he murmured, his fingers lightly grazing her arm. "Do you know that?" Megan felt her body tense with anticipation, her skin tingling where he touched her. She could feel the rush of endorphins from the workout still coursing through her, heightening everything. She was too aware of how close they were, how easy it would be to close the small distance between their lips. I don't know what you mean," she stammered, though the heat in her voice betrayed her. The truth was, she knew exactly what he meant. Every session, every flirtatious remark, every stolen glance had led them here. And now, standing in this secluded corner of the gym, there was no denying the desire that crackled between them. Tyler's hand moved to her waist, pulling her gently toward him. His fingers pressed into her skin, firm yet gentle, as if testing how far he could go. Megan felt her breath hitch, her heart pounding in her chest. This was wrong, so wrong, but the thrill of it all made it impossible to pull away. "I think you do," he whispered, his lips brushing against her ear. His other hand came up to cup her cheek, tilting her head so their eyes met. There was something raw in his gaze, something that made her stomach flip. For a moment, they were frozen in place, the world around them fading into a blur. Megan's mind screamed at her to stop, to push him away, but her body betrayed her. The temptation was too strong. She could feel the weight of his gaze on her lips, the anticipation hanging thick in the air between them. And then, without thinking, she leaned in. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, but the moment their lips touched, the floodgates opened. Tyler's hands tightened around her waist, pulling her closer as their mouths moved in sync, their bodies pressed together. Megan felt her knees go weak, her heart racing as the intensity of the kiss deepened. It was everything she hadn't felt in so long: passion, desire, a need that consumed her whole. For a brief, dizzying moment, nothing else mattered. Not the gym, not her marriage, not the consequences that would inevitably follow. All that existed was the heat of Tyler's body against hers, the feel of his lips moving hungrily over her own, and the electric charge that sparked between them with every touch. But reality came crashing back all too soon. The sound of footsteps echoed nearby, and Megan pulled away abruptly, her breath ragged as she looked around in a panic. Tyler, too, took a step back, running a hand through his hair as if trying to compose himself. They stood there for a moment, both of them breathing heavily, their faces flushed. I can't do this, Megan whispered, though her body screamed at her to ignore the voice of reason. She took a step back, creating some distance between them, though the magnetic pull still lingered. Tyler's eyes softened slightly, though the hunger was still there. I know, he said, his voice low and strained. But we will. Megan's heart skipped a beat at his words. She should have been horrified, disgusted even, but instead, she felt a surge of excitement. The dangerous thrill of the forbidden affair had only just begun, and deep down she knew she was already in too deep. Part 3. Crossing the line. Days turned into weeks, and Megan found herself sliding deeper into the affair. What had once been stolen glances and secret kisses in dark corners, now escalated to something far more daring. Every time she came to the gym, the anticipation grew. Her body reacted instinctively when Tyler approached, her pulse quickening the moment his hands found her again. She told herself it was just the rush of the workouts, the endorphins coursing through her veins that made her crave him so intensely. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just that. It was the way Tyler looked at her like she was the only person in the room, the way his touch lingered in places it shouldn't. He made her feel desired in a way that had been missing for far too long. The boundaries they once cautiously tiptoed around had completely shattered. One evening, after an especially grueling session, Tyler asked her to stay behind after closing time. The gym was nearly empty, the last few members filtering out as the lights dimmed. Megan stood by the row of weights, her breath still ragged from the intense workout. Sweat clung to her skin, her muscles aching in that satisfying way that came after pushing her body to its limits. Tyler locked the front door with a quiet click, the sound sending a jolt of excitement through her. The air between them was thick with unspoken tension, the kind that had been simmering just below the surface for weeks. Megan's heart raced as he walked toward her, his eyes locked on hers, the dim lighting casting sharp shadows on his chiseled features. You're pushing yourself hard, he said, his voice low, almost a growl. There was a hunger in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. He reached out, brushing a strand of damp hair from her face. His fingers lingered on her cheek, his touch electric. I like that. Megan swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. She could feel the heat of his body so close to hers, the space between them disappearing with every passing second. I had a good trainer, she replied, her voice shaky but laced with desire. He smiled at that, a slow, seductive grin that sent a shiver down her spine. You're more than just a good student, Megan. Without another word, he closed the gap between them, his hands sliding down her waist, pulling her against him. His lips found hers with a fierce urgency, as if weeks of pent-up desire had finally reached a boiling point. Megan's mind went blank, her body responding instinctively, her hands gripping the front of his shirt as he deepened the kiss. They moved together in sync, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. Tyler's hands roamed her body, exploring every curve, every inch of her, that he had only been able to touch in fleeting moments during their training sessions. The intensity between them was undeniable, the passion raw and all-consuming. Megan moaned softly as his lips trailed down her neck, his teeth grazing her skin just enough to make her knees go weak. Her hands found his chest, sliding over the hard muscles beneath his shirt. The heat between them was overwhelming, each touch igniting a fire inside her that she hadn't felt in years. I've wanted this for so long, Tyler breathed against her skin, his hands gripping her hips tightly. There was a desperation in his voice, one that mirrored her own. He pulled her toward him, guiding her to the padded bench behind them. The gym around them was silent, the only sound the rapid beating of their hearts, and the faint music still playing from the overhead speakers. Megan hesitated for a brief second, her mind flickering back to Chris. She thought about their life together, their quiet evenings at home, the comfortable routine they had fallen into. But the guilt was drowned out by the overwhelming desire she felt for Tyler in this moment. The way his hands moved over her body made her forget everything else: her marriage, the risk, the consequences. Her body responded to him instinctively, her lips parting to let out a soft gasp as his fingers dug into her skin. The sensation of his touch sent shockwaves through her, and any thought of turning back vanished completely. This was happening. They moved with a fevered urgency, as if the world outside didn't exist anymore. Tyler's hands slid beneath her sports bra, his fingers trailing across her toned stomach, his lips crashing back onto hers with a ferocity that took her breath away. Megan's head spun with a dizzying mix of desire and adrenaline, her body aching for more with every touch, every kiss. And then, in the middle of their heated moment, reality came crashing down. The front door of the gym swung open with a loud creak, the sound cutting through the air like a knife. Megan froze, her heart stopping in her chest. Tyler pulled away abruptly, his eyes wide with panic as they both turned to look toward the entrance. Chris stood in the doorway, his face a mix of confusion and hurt. He had a bouquet of flowers in his hand, a sweet gesture meant to surprise her after her workout, but the look in his eyes said he already knew something was wrong. Very wrong. For a moment, the three of them stood frozen, the tension in the room thick enough to cut with a knife. Megan felt the color drain from her face, her body going cold with shock. Her mind raced, scrambling for something to say, but the words wouldn't come. Chris's eyes flicked between her and Tyler, taking in the scene, the closeness, the disheveled clothes, the unmistakable guilt written across Megan's face. His jaw clenched, and the flowers slipped from his hand, falling to the floor in slow motion. The room seemed to tilt as Megan watched, her heart pounding in her ears. "Megan." Chris's voice was quiet, but it was laced with a pain that cut through her like a blade. He didn't need to say anything more. The look in his eyes told her everything. He had seen enough. Tyler took a step back, his face pale, unsure of what to say or do. The silence in the gym was deafening, and for the first time Megan felt the full weight of what she had done. I can explain," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. But even as the words left her lips, she knew they were hollow. There was no explanation that could undo what had just happened, no excuse that would make this right. Chris didn't respond. He turned on his heel and walked out of the gym, the door slamming shut behind him. Part 4. Consequences. The door's slam reverberated through the gym, a final punctuation to the silence that followed Chris's exit. Megan stood frozen in place, her heart pounding so loudly in her ears that it drowned out everything else. She stared at the door, unable to move, her mind struggling to process what had just happened. Tyler shifted beside her, but even his presence seemed distant now, almost irrelevant in the wake of the destruction she had caused. The adrenaline that had fueled their secret meetings vanished, replaced by a cold, sinking feeling in the pit of her stomach. She had just been caught. Her husband, the man she had shared a life with, had walked in on the very thing she had tried to convince herself wasn't real. And now there was no going back. "Megan," Tyler's voice broke through the fog in her mind. It was low, unsure, as if even he didn't know how to handle what had just happened. He reached out to touch her arm, but Megan pulled away instinctively, the shame washing over her like a wave. "I have to go," she whispered, her voice trembling. She couldn't face this, not here, not now. She needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out how everything had spiraled so far out of control. "Megan, wait," Tyler began, but she was already moving toward the locker room, her feet carrying her on autopilot. She didn't want to hear whatever reassurances he might offer. Didn't want to think about the affair, the lies, or the mess she had made of her life. All she could focus on was getting out, escaping the suffocating weight of the gym, of Tyler, of everything that had led her here. She stumbled into the locker room, her hands shaking as she grabbed her bag. The cold tiles beneath her feet felt grounding in the midst of the storm of emotions that raged inside her. Megan stared at her reflection in the mirror, her cheeks flushed, her hair a tangled mess. She barely recognized the woman staring back at her. This wasn't who she was supposed to be. She was a wife, a partner, someone who had made vows and promises that now lay shattered at her feet. For a moment she thought about Chris, how he had looked at her, the pain in his eyes when he realized what he had walked in on. The guilt gnawed at her, making it hard to breathe. She hadn't just betrayed him physically, she had destroyed the trust they had spent years building. And for what? A few stolen moments of passion? The thrill of being wanted again? Megan pressed her hands to her face, trying to hold back the tears that threatened to spill over. She had to leave, had to get out before the weight of her actions crushed her completely. As she slung her bag over her shoulder and rushed out of the locker room, her phone buzzed in her hand. She stopped, glancing down at the screen, her stomach twisting when she saw the message. Tyler. See you later, babe. The words felt like a slap to the face. How could he be so casual about this? Didn't he understand what had just happened? What they had done? Megan's heart raced as she clutched the phone tighter, her thumb hovering over the screen. Part of her wanted to respond, to tell him it was over, that this could never happen again. But another part, the part that had led her down this path in the first place, ached to see him again, to feel that rush of desire that had become addictive. Her phone buzzed again. A second message. Megan froze, her blood running cold as she realized it wasn't from Tyler. The phone vibrated in her hand, the name on the screen glaring at her like a cruel reminder of what she had done. Chris. Her breath caught in her throat. Slowly, she opened the message, her hands trembling as she read the words on the screen. Chris. We need to talk. It was simple, direct, but the weight of those 4 words pressed down on her like a heavy stone. There was no hiding anymore, no avoiding the confrontation that was coming. Chris knew, and now she had to face the consequences of her choices. The gym felt like it was closing in on her, the once familiar place now a prison of her own making. Megan shoved the phone into her bag and hurried out the door, her mind racing. The cool evening air hit her face as she stepped outside, but it did little to calm the storm brewing inside her. She couldn't shake the image of Chris's face when he had seen her with Tyler, the hurt, the betrayal. It would haunt her forever. She started walking, her feet moving faster as if she could somehow outrun the mess she had created. But no matter how fast she walked, the reality followed her like a shadow, growing darker with every step. As Megan reached the parking lot, her phone buzzed again. She knew without looking that it was Chris. She could picture him now, sitting at home, waiting for her, the silence between them growing louder with each passing second. Her fingers tightened around the phone, but she didn't answer. Instead, she dropped it into her bag and kept walking, her heart pounding in her chest. She wasn't ready to face him yet, wasn't ready to confront the mess she had made. Not now, not yet. She needed time. Time to figure out what she was going to say. Time to figure out if she could ever make this right. Time to decide if she even wanted to. But deep down, Megan knew that time was running out. Part 5. Unraveling. Megan walked through the dimly lit streets, the cool evening breeze doing little to calm the storm raging inside her. She wasn't sure where she was heading, just that she couldn't go home, not yet. The weight of Chris's message felt like a ticking time bomb in her pocket, waiting to explode. Every step she took brought her closer to an inevitable confrontation she wasn't ready for. How could she explain what had happened? How could she justify the choices she'd made? Her thoughts were interrupted by the buzz of her phone again, a sound that now felt like nails on a chalkboard. She pulled it out of her bag, her heart pounding as she saw Tyler's name light up the screen. Tyler. Are you okay? The message was so simple, so unaware of the chaos that had been unleashed. Megan's fingers hovered over the screen, torn between ignoring him and typing out the flood of emotions she was drowning in. She could still feel the heat of his touch, the intensity of their moments together, but that thrill had been replaced by something darker now. She had crossed the line, and there was no going back. Her phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't Tyler, it was Chris. Her heart raced as she saw his name appear once more. Chris. We need to talk. I'm home. Come now. Megan's stomach twisted with dread. There was no avoiding it anymore. Chris was waiting, and she had to face him. She thought about turning around, about going home and confronting the fallout of her choices, but she couldn't bring herself to move. Her legs felt heavy, her mind racing with fear of what he would say, of how he would look at her now that the truth was out. She sat down on a nearby bench, staring blankly at the darkening sky. How had everything gotten so out of control? She thought back to the first time she had seen Tyler at the gym. How innocent it had all seemed. Just a spark, a harmless attraction. But that spark had grown into a fire, and now it had consumed everything. She scrolled through the messages on her phone again. Tyler's casual, "See you later, babe," felt surreal in the context of what had just happened. Could he really be so blind to the destruction their affair had caused? Or was it that he just didn't care? Megan didn't know how to feel anymore. The passion that had once burned so brightly between them now felt tainted by the guilt of what she had done to Chris. Her phone buzzed again, and this time, Megan reluctantly opened the message from Tyler. It wasn't just a quick text this time, it was a longer one, filled with questions and uncertainty. Tyler. What happened with your husband? I saw his face. Are you okay? Look, I didn't mean for things to get this messy, but I can't stop thinking about you. I know this is complicated, but I need to know where we stand. The words made Megan's stomach churn. Complicated. That didn't even begin to cover it. The truth was, she didn't know where they stood. What had started as a fling, an escape from the monotony of her life, had now spiraled into something she couldn't control. Tyler had become more than just a distraction. He had become an obsession, one that had pushed her to betray everything she held dear. She typed a response, her fingers trembling as she composed the words. Megan. I don't know, Tyler. I don't know what's happening anymore. Chris knows. I can't keep doing this, I need time. She hesitated for a moment, then hit send. Megan stared at the screen, half expecting Tyler to respond immediately, to try and pull her back into the tangled web they had woven together. But instead, her phone remained silent. The reality of what she had done sank in deeper. No matter what happened next, there was no clean way out of this. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. The evening light began to fade, and Megan knew she couldn't stay out here forever. She had to go home. She had to face Chris. Slowly she stood and made her way toward her car, her legs feeling like lead with every step. As she drove back, her mind raced, playing out the confrontation that awaited her at home. She imagined Chris sitting on the couch, his face a mix of anger and hurt, waiting for her to walk through the door and explain the unexplainable. How would he look at her now? Would he even want to hear her side of the story? The drive felt longer than usual, her heart pounding in her chest as her house came into view. The lights were on, casting a soft glow through the windows, and Megan could see Chris's silhouette through the blinds, sitting on the couch. She took a deep breath as she pulled into the driveway, her hands trembling on the steering wheel. This was it. The moment everything would unravel. She stepped out of the car, her legs shaking as she walked toward the front door. Her heart raced with every step, the weight of what she had done pressing down on her like a ton of bricks. Megan hesitated at the door, her hand resting on the handle. She wasn't sure if she could do this, if she could face the man she had betrayed. But there was no turning back now. She opened the door slowly, stepping inside. Chris was sitting on the couch, just as she had imagined, his face unreadable as he looked up at her. The tension in the room was palpable, the silence deafening. Megan swallowed hard, her throat dry as she tried to find the words, but nothing came out. For a long moment they just stared at each other, the weight of the unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Chris spoke, his voice low and measured, though Megan could hear the pain beneath the surface. "I don't even know what to say," he began, his eyes locking onto hers. "I don't understand, Megan. How did we get here?" His words cut through her like a knife. Megan felt her throat tighten, the tears she had been holding back threatening to spill over. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for this to happen, Chris. He held up a hand, stopping her mid-sentence. "Don't," he said, his voice firm but shaky. "Don't try to explain it. I saw what I saw. You don't need to say anything." Megan's chest tightened, the guilt washing over her in waves. She wanted to explain, to tell him how everything had spiraled out of control, how she had gotten lost in the rush of it all, but she knew that nothing she could say would make it better. Chris stood up, running a hand through his hair as he paced the room. "How long?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. Megan hesitated, the truth sitting heavy on her tongue. She knew she couldn't lie, not anymore. "A few weeks," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. Chris stopped pacing, turning to face her, his expression a mix of disbelief and hurt. "Weeks?" he repeated, his voice rising slightly. "You've been doing this for weeks, Megan?" She nodded, unable to meet his gaze, the shame overwhelming her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Chris took a deep breath, his eyes hardening as he looked at her. "I need time to think," he said quietly, his voice steady but cold. "I don't know if I can forgive this." Megan's heart sank. She had known this would be the outcome, but hearing the words out loud made it all the more real. There was no fixing this, no going back to the way things were. Without another word, Chris turned and walked out of the room, leaving Megan standing alone in the silence of their home, her heart shattered. Her phone buzzed in her bag, pulling her from her thoughts. She pulled it out, her breath catching as she read the message from Tyler. "Tyler, I'll be here when you're ready." Megan stared at the message, her heart heavy with the weight of her choices. She didn't know if she would ever be ready, if she could ever face the future that awaited her. All she knew was that everything had changed, and there was no turning back. How would you react if you found out your partner was seeing their personal trainer for more than just fitness? Share your thoughts on how this story should end.